he says. In fact, specifically, this act included an amendment that was offered by Dianne Feinstein, in which which required the intelligence community to adhere to the same standards for intelligence interrogations that are used by our military. So what did this prohibit? It prohibited waterboarding, long-time standing, hypothermia, the use of psychotropic drugs, sleep deprivation in excess of 48 hours. It prohibited sensory deprivation and sensory overload techniques, the so-called Kubart techniques. And all of these things are referred to collectively by our president as the program. So he went on to say, this is essential for our security. Terrorist plots have been averted because we use these techniques, and American lives have been saved. To which I say, bullshit. Not one Al-Qaeda unit was rolled up as a result of the use of these techniques. Not one terrorist plan was averted as a result of the use of these techniques. What has happened as a result of these techniques? Well, we have that from the National Intelligence Estimate now being prepared. We're being told that if we look at Al-Qaeda and associated terrorist organizations, they are as strong now, if not more strong. And how have they resurged? They've resurged largely as a result of this president's embrace of torture, which has been the #1 recruitment tool for these organizations. So, since it's Sunday and we're in a church, I'll quote from a sermon. I'll quote from a sermon from 1625, written by John Donne. In the middle of the 16th century, our ancestors were deeply focused on this issue, the torture issue. In fact, we're seeing a repetition of many of the issues that our ancestors dealt with in the 17th century. Isn't that interesting? And John Donne said, "Those in power and authority who reach to torture show not wisdom but ignorance, not strength but weakness, because torture is an abomination." And that is the belief on which our republic was founded. A rejection of those cruel techniques that were used by the Stuart monarchs. One of them, I seem to recall, lost his head as a result of some of this. And indeed, that was a charge against him at his trial. If we look at this rejection we look at the president's assertion that he is entitled to torture to use these techniques, he puts forward the argument that by vetoing this legislation, he's made it lawful or continued its legality. But the facts are elsewhere. The facts are it was illegal. It was a criminal act the day he was inaugurated as president, and it's a criminal act today, and this never changed. And this president's use of these techniques is a high crime and misdemeanor and is a grounds for his removal from office. And it was in 1649, too. Then they turned to the death penalty, and I'm not advocating that. I want to point to something I see coming on the horizon, though, which is going to give new wind to the impeachment issue with respect to both the president and the vice president. We need to go back and think to something that happened on December 7th, 2006. Of course, December 7th is a day that lives in infamy, as we all know. But there was that day of infamy that began the Second World War for this country, and then there's that day of infamy that marked the beginning of the end for Alberto Gonzalez, Fredo. That's the day on which he fired, well, how many did he fire? He won't answer under oath, and neither will anyone else from the Department of Justice. Let's say 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 U.S. attorneys. There's an internal investigation going on today into how these officers of the law wound up being terminated. And I want to say at the outset, I know a number of these U.S. attorneys. Some of these individuals who were fired represent the best in our Department of Justice. They adhere to the highest ethical and professional standards, and they're Republicans. The ultimate decision to terminate the U.S. Attorney in New Mexico was taken in the Oval Office by President Bush himself after Alberto Gonzalez actually showed a little bit of nerve and said no. He was overridden by the president who directed the firing. And that was related to the U.S. Attorney in New Mexico's refusal to improperly announce the indictment of an elected Democratic official in the 2 weeks before the 2006 election in order to manipulate that election. Now, this is going to create a very important opportunity for Congress to actually exercise its oversight responsibility, to convene hearings and start looking into this. And this clearly it's a criminal act as I understand it. It's an impeachable offense. It's yet another grounds for impeachment. And it's an area where the inquiry can only be pursued in the first instance in the House Judiciary Committee, because these internal Department of Justice organs are going to say, we have jurisdiction to deal with the Department of Justice employees. We can't deal with the President of the United States. We can't even deal with Karl Rove, who was also involved in all of this, right? So I think we're going to see emerging on the horizon in the course of the next 3 to 4 months an issue which will provide a prime opportunity to further pursue the impeachment question. And this is what impeachment is all about. The device of impeachment is something that arose in the 17th century in England, and it arose as a response to efforts to subvert the constitutional order of the state. That is what is meant by high crimes and misdemeanors, particularly that. And that is the essence of the problems we see across the board here, and particularly including those involving the Department of Justice. How many of you have read Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451? You know, it's an interesting science fiction work, I think, and one of the things that always struck me as most fascinating about it is, of course, you know, in the end, it's about a fire department. But, you know, this fire department doesn't exist to put out fires. It exists to start them. And under President Bush, our Department of Justice has become a Department of Justice along Ray Bradbury's lines. And those who stood in the way of that subversion of our legal guardians have been swept away. That's the essence of what we see with the U.S. Attorney scandal. They're going to say to you, this is an overblown employment matter. In fact, Alberto Gonzalez actually said that in an op-ed he published in USA Today. Don't you believe it? This is about our constitutional order and whether we will have a government of men beholden to the law. Because the operating principle